if you leave it with the executive and you say that a bill is not valid without a statement, that gives the executive the ability to hold up legislation that 9 council members may want to vote enact simply by not submitting an impact statement, which is certainly not something you want to do.
Mm-hmm.
If you move it to OLO, then it is in a similar situation as the recent legislation with the economic impact statements, that it's under the control of the council. And the council could then ensure that there is an impact statement if there isn't OLO reports to the council. The compromise in the economic development bill, the economic impact bill, was that for non-expedited legislation would be invalid without a statement, but expedited legislation would remain valid even without an impact statement. And that's Ms. Navarro's suggested amendment here. Just one word that may just fly away, but I would caution you against any time, and as well with the economic impact statements, of enacting a law that would create a reason to challenge your legislation on something other than the merits. But be that as it may, if you want to do that,
That's your disclaimer, right?
you know, my disclaimer is not something I would recommend, but it's something you've done before with economic impact statements, and it would be similar if the Office of Legislative Oversight. Realizing also that if OLO has this responsibility, they may need more resources, which will come up later.
Right, so, correct. So number one, really separating the responsibility of legislation to be the Office of Legislative Oversight to produce that impact statement. Obviously, they would have to work very closely with the administration to get the information or the data or anything like that. And then number two, mirroring the issue of compliance with the economic impact bill. Although, you know, we did speak to Mr. Seelar, you know, he is willing to do this. Obviously, at some point we'll have to talk about the effective date, because we do need to think of budget process, because obviously they're going to need additional capacity to do that, and it's something that we're going to have to, you know, work through the operating budget process, but they're fine with that. And if we agree on doing that, then, you know, that would take care of this issue of compliance and unintended, you know, consequences. So that's what that is.
Great. I was just going to ask about if we're talking about effective dates, so that sounds good.
We're gonna address that in a minute. Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
Okay. So with that objection, we're good with both making the change to the Office of Legislative Oversight for legislation, and also mirroring the compliance piece with the previous economic impact bill.
All right, that amendment is on Circle 118 and 119. No, that's not it. It's that amendment's on 113. Just to be clarified, that's Circle 113 is the amendment. It shifts for legislation and leaves the executive responsible for doing the impact statement for management initiatives and programs in the operating budget, which makes more sense. So, all right, so that one, that's Navarro Amendment 1. Okay, the next one, just talking about the fiscal impact of the bill. The OMB has a fiscal impact statement of, they've assumed 2 professional employees, new employees in the new Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice, and an additional $150,000 each year for training. We've not received an economic impact statement on this bill. You know, and I have to figure out when I'm not even sure when that bill takes effect, you know.
Yet. We had to, as per our previous discussion, we had to
Right, I think
delay
we
it to
moved
the
it
point we allow
back.
them to hire. So we still do have economic impact statements at the executive branch.
The executive branch is still supposed to do it, yeah, and we just haven't gotten one. I don't know that there's an easy way to calculate the economic impact of this, but it hasn't been done.
Oh, we had to do the bill.
At least I haven't seen it. And, but the economic impact is based on their estimate. That may be accurate, it may be low. I mean, they're just taking a shot at how many people they think they're going to need. If you move something to OLO and they need another person, that's going to add to it as well.
Yeah. And I assume, I mean, I think that this is obviously an approximate impact.
As usual.
Yeah, statement, and I'm assuming that once we pass the bill and folks begin to really think through how they're going to organize everything, et cetera, this is kind of minimum, something that we're going to have to address during budget as well.
But I think, I don't remember when the bill to change the economic impact statement, it's March 1st, yeah.
That's
So,
my free time.
all right, I'm just worried that it's going to invalidate this bill. I don't think so.
Well, we better.
Yeah, we better make
Check on that. I
We don't wanna do
believe we
that.
specifically moved it to March
I
1st
think we did.
in order to ameliorate that potential concern.
I
But
know OLO hasn't hired an economist yet.
I totally agree with the council president that it's always just going to be an approximate, and we're not going to know the reality until we actually get down the pike. But it would be helpful, just as for purposes of the full council packet, if we could reference the change with OLO and training. I think just to set the expectations for what the budget requirements are going to be. I think it would be helpful. Sometimes when it goes to full council, it has what the original bill was, and we push it forward, but at least a reference to some of the changes as amended by the committee, just so we're setting the appropriate expectation to our colleagues and also to the public that
Right.
we are going to have to come back to this during the budget process and reflect it, and there will be additional costs as amended. Thank you.
And in order to get going quickly, it may require a supplemental appropriation or a special appropriation, one way or the other, like we did for the IG. All right, the next one is issue 7, the definition of social justice. This is something I noticed after writing the bill. The definition of social justice is really a definition of social injustice, and that throughout the bill use the term social justice issues, and that would make more sense. The executive sent over some suggested changes, and he had a different definition for social justice, which is completely different, not completely, but significantly different, and includes race in his definition, which I think is problematic since we're trying to separate them out. We're having racial equity and social justice, and he's got race in the definition of social justice, which in my mind kind of confuses the two. My suggestion is to go with my amended language in the middle of page 6, that social justice issues mean one or more social constructs that artificially divide people into distinct groups based on age, gender, sexual orientation, gender identification, religion, or disability. The executive's language for social justice is a little lower on that page in italics. Social justice means that everyone deserves to benefit from the same economic, political, and social rights and opportunities, regardless of race, socio and economic status, gender, sexual preference, religion, disability, or other characteristics.
What would be the harm, though?
Well, the harm, it's fine if you want to define it that way, I suppose, but I wouldn't use race in there, and I'm not sure you want to use socioeconomic status and other characteristics leaves it pretty wide open. I think you should be a little more specific about what you mean.
Yeah, issues, doesn't that solve the problem?
What's that?
The council staff recommendation, doesn't that solve the problem?
Say it again.
Yeah, I appreciate the executive's thought process. The council staff's thought process is to base, the issue that was raised, which is a very valid issue, that we say social justice, we really are referencing social injustice, and so we need to solve that problem. Council staff is saying, by saying social justice issues and referencing, it's the same intent that the legislation have and solves the issue of talking about injustice or saying justice and meaning injustice, which is that's what this is about. We're trying to address the issues related to social justice, which includes injustice. So, I personally, I don't feel strongly about this. I yield to the bill sponsor and council president, but I'd personally be comfortable with the council staff's recommendation of keeping it as close to how she drafted it, but addressing the issue that was raised, which is very valid by some of the community members.
I think originally, obviously, the purpose of, and this is also what King County has done, the racial equity and social justice, was that there are some very distinct issues and root causes and historical context that relate specifically to racial equity. And there are other also issues that, as elected officials, legislators, decision makers, we have to take into consideration that fall under the social justice, premise. And so the idea was that, there should be legislation and there should be a framework that allows us to be very focused on these distinct issues, and not just separate them completely or say that we're going to do one and then later on another. So I think that's why it was kind of separated, but obviously they're interconnected in many ways. So in many ways I'm agnostic because I feel like both, in my opinion, get to the same place. I think that just saying that everyone deserves to benefit from the same economic, political, and social rights and opportunities regardless of race, socioeconomic status, black, reminds me of what we did at MCPS way back in the day. We were trying to define the academic achievement gap issue. I don't think there's any harm in reinstating that. So.
I'm agnostic as well.
Yeah.
I'm in a similar mode as you are, but I always get concerned when we start listing out things, because if you forget something in the list when you're writing it, then all of a sudden somebody says, oh, you didn't include that, and you should have, or you didn't do something wrong because I'm not on that list, or that person's not on that list. So the whole idea for the county executives list, I think, is more, in some ways, more encompassing than the county, what you're suggesting, Bob, because you talk about other characteristics. I'm not exactly sure what that means, but it sort of is a catch-all at the end of it, and political and social rights and opportunities. I literally could go either way. I can see, and if there's no way that we could have a hybrid, as far as I'm concerned, as far as I can see, I guess we could add some language. But I think the bottom line on this is we want someone to want this to be as inclusive as it can possibly be.
Right. Yes. Okay, so for the I can go with the social justice definition that the executive recommended. I think Councilmember Friedson makes the point that it should be that we should perhaps say sexual orientation. But I don't see any problem with the social justice definition that the executive recommended. I think it's pretty
It's more encompassing.
Yeah, I think it's all encompassing, with the exception of saying sexual orientation instead of sexual preference. Just
You want
be-
to change
just
sexual
to be-
preference to sexual orientation?
Yeah, because I think that's kind of a term that we use,
Right.
so it can be consistent.
Yeah, well,
Okay.
Thank you.
okay. That's true.
That's true. What's that age?
And we did say age in the social justice, in the,
Community.
in ours, yeah. So we do need to put
And
age. Thank you.
Plus age. And you're going to leave race in there?
Yeah,
Okay.
I don't think it hurts.
They're related and different, so that reflects that.
All right.
Okay.
All right. The next one is dealing with the planning board. The bill requires the planning board to consider racial equity and social justice impact when they're proposing a master plan. The state law authorizes the council to establish factors for the planning board to consider in proposing master plans, and the council had already required certain considerations of environmental issues. This adds that. There was a lot of confusion, I think, in some of the correspondence that we were somehow trying to reduce and lower the standard for environmental concerns, which we clearly were not. But there's an amendment that Councilmember Friedson has proposed that would put the original language back the way it was and simply add the racial equity and social impact, the social justice impact statement as a separate line item, which I think resolves any issue as to whether we're trying to lower the environmental standard. So we would recommend that as well.
All right. Councilmember Friedson, you're all good with your amendment?
Yeah, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
With that objection, we'll
You're good with your own amendment?
adopt
so you agree with
Councilmember
yourself?
Friedson's
So I
amendment
agree by myself.
that he agrees with.
Yeah. I might challenge that at some point. I
Right.
reserve the right to not support one of my own amendments, but on this one, I'm good.
Okay.
Number 9, this was something that was brought out in the public hearing testimony. We've sort of already touched on it a little bit in definition of social justice, but there were some speakers who talked about, I thought this was about race. Why are we bringing in age, gender, sexual orientation, other things? Are we just watering down our attempt to create racial equity? Judging from the discussion on social justice, I assume the committee is okay with the way it is.
Right.
I will point out one thing. We also left out in the executive's definition, leaves out gender identity as well. If you want to add that in.
Well, I actually thought about that. It just changes instead of, it says gender instead of gender identification. So it does have gender, it just doesn't have gender identification. I think it's fine to
I
add.
think we could do both because under social justice.
Yeah,
issues, we
gender
have
and
both.
gender identification are
We have both.
often
Yeah.
different.
Yeah, so that's what I'm saying. I think we can add it. We should add it.
Gender
Yeah.
identification. right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. No change for 9. All right, we're up to number 10. The composition of the advisory committee. Well, we got a lot of comments on this one. And most of the comments were not enough public members, need more public members, and add more public members, pay the public members, and add more public members. And I think, if I wasn't clear, it was add more public members.
Very insightful.
Yeah.
Right. Right now, we've got, and also we had a request from Casey Anderson, who said, how'd you leave us out of this? And when you talked about employees of different county agencies and as a member. So Council President Navarro has got an amendment that would add public members. And the amendment is at Circle 115. Right now, there are 3 public members. The amendment would add an additional, it would change it from a 9-member committee, add 6 more members, 5 of them public members, and then 1 member from the Park and Planning Commission.
So it's 8 public members now.
So it would be a total of 8 public members of the 15, which would be a majority of public members in the, and that's the amendment on Circle 115,
Right.
which,
Councilor Murphy.
Yeah, I just wanted to propose a friendly amendment to the amendment. I think that the council president has struck a good balance of addressing some of the concerns that have been raised. I just wanted to raise an additional one of whether, rather than it being listed as an employee of the 3 independent agencies, Park and Planning, MCPS, and HOC, that the county executive appoint his executive agencies and the public members, and that the superintendent and the chair of the Park and Planning Commission and the chair of the Housing Opportunities Commission, it be they serve or their designee serve. I just think it's a more common and appropriate way to deal with an independent agency where the county executive is not appointing an employee of an agency that he doesn't oversee.
That's great.
So just a friendly amendment.
I accept the friendly amendment.
just point of clarification, we've got, there's also, I didn't mention this, the Navarro amendment would change an employee of the Montgomery County Public Schools to an employee of the public education system in the county, which would include, I guess, Shady Grove and
Montgomery College.
and Montgomery College. So I don't know that you can use, I guess you could say a designee of a public education system in the county. I would say, rather than the chair, because you don't know which agency you're
Right.
talking about if you're going to go with that amendment. As far as Park and Planning, you certainly could do the chair or the chair's designee. And the same with the Housing Opportunities Commission. As far as so I understand your amendments, your friendly amendment, you wanted to change it to just for
Well,
Park
chair
and
and
Planning.
designee of HOC and Park. and
HOC, all right, just HOC and,
Park and Planning, and I will yield to
And
you on how you want
the-
to handle public education.
Well, I guess,
Well, that's
Who
who
would-
would,
who would-
because it's more than one agency.
right, so I
Keep
guess
that
it
as
wouldn't
the
be
county
chair,
executive.
but it would be whoever the
Chair or superintendent.
president, superintendent.
well, how about just the designee of a public education?
Yeah,
Do we need to clarify who would propose that to us?
Well, I mean.
The main thing about the other two is that we know who is sending
Right.
us over. It's either them or somebody they say is the person. The public education
Right.
system's not. So
Well, you're not, I mean, you're going to get potentially suggestions from at least 3 that I could think of. Public education system, in the county, MCPS may send over somebody that they want, and the executive's going to have to pick just one.
He would have to choose amongst them.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's the only way to do that.
That's fine, yeah. There's no, I don't think there's a practical problem with that.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
I think it works.
Yeah,
But can I?
yeah.
But for the others, for instance, HOC, it would be the chair of HOC or their designee.
Right.
Any place where there's a single agency, that they would actually either, the chair or one of their designees.
Right, but not for like the county departments, leave
Well-
employees or.
I don't know how you-
Department of HHS, you've got the Department of Correction and Rehabilitation, you've got a sworn officer of the county police department. I mean, the executive would then pick somebody from one of those agencies. I mean, they're all
That's how we
working for
do
the
it right now.
executive.
All right, I can live with
I don't
that.
see that's a problem.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I think if we just, instead of, I had separated all three out, it was an oversight on my part of thinking it was MCPS and not the public education system. So if you just single out the two that have independent chairs, have it as chair or designee, and then keep the public education appointment with all the other appointments that the county executive is expected to send over, then I don't think it's a problem. The county executive can choose amongst those different public education entities.
Right.
Okay, I can live with that.
Okay. Oh, I should mention, the executive also requested that the executive be given discretion to choose the departments from which the employee members will be appointed. We've listed specific departments. I will say that probably does have that authority, even under this law, because it says it should be from this department. I would assume he really could do it from someone else, from a different department. He'd get away with it. But if you want to change that to the county executive will pick X number of employees from,
Yeah, I don't.
okay, we don't want to do that. Okay.
No, but we
Yeah, I mean, that's
do
the idea,
say
is to
certain
do the
departments,
We
like
would like,
collaboration
right,
council and
I
other,
think
I mean, it's very common.
we're signaling what we would like
Yeah,
for that
right.
to, yeah.
Okay. We've done 11, that's the compensation. 12 is should the advisory committee have additional duties? And again, Council President Navarro has got an Amendment 5 on Circle 117. Some of the duties that were requested by some of the speakers are not legally possible, like giving the advisory committee the authority to stop legislation. But there is an amendment here on Circle 117, which would require the advisory committee to meet periodically with the racial equity and social justice lead for each department and office. That's on Circle 117. Is there an objection to that, or is that okay?
I don't object to my own amendment.
You reserve the right to object, but you don't object to this one.
She's never wrong, I often am, so
That's
she never has to
hilarious.
object her.
All right. Should the bill require funding to implement this program? No, I don't think so.
Yeah.
You know, there's a, you can put something in the bill, we've gone through this before several times, to require funding, but of course, when it comes to the budget, 5 council members don't put funding in the budget, it's not in the budget. But be that as it may, we've done this before, and we did it most recently in the Inspector General bill, is to put in a provision that would require the council to ensure there's adequate funding in the budget. I mean, it would be up to the council, and that's Navarro Amendment number 6 on Circle 118. Realizing that obviously it can be overturned by 5 council members in May, but each year, but assuming that doesn't happen, that's the amendment. It's on Circle 118.
Any objection?
Can I?
Sure.
For the whole idea that it says full funding, wouldn't it be, once the council approves the budget, wouldn't that be the full funding at that point? I mean, I don't know what full funding would be other than that. I mean, if the county executive sent over his suggested budget, it's only a suggested budget, but it would not be, was that the number that people were looking for, or was that
The
the,
amendment says that the budget is sufficient. I don't know that it says full funding.
It says sufficient for the office to provide the services required and to
I'm looking
implement
at the
racial equity and
packet rather
social
than the
justice
amendment.
action.
Yeah, the amendment.
the amendment takes care of that?
Ensure that the
Doesn't say
operating
full
budget is
funding, it just
sufficient for the
says-
office. Yeah.
It takes care of it. Thank you.
All right. Now, the next one, which I think is the next to last one we have, is the description of the mandatory components of the Racial Equity and Social Justice Action Plan. The executive made some suggested modifications in the language, and you can see on page 9, the language that's in the bill, and then the language that the executive is suggesting, which I don't have a problem with his suggested
They like
language.
the same. These exhibition and social, right. Okay. I mean, I think it just kind of validates what we have.
I don't think it's substantively
listed.
different.
So we're fine.
Your call.
Sure.
So we're
We'll be
okay with
collegial
it.
with the executive, and we will,
6 of one,
Accept.
a half dozen of the other.
Okay.
Reads pretty much.
Use executive's language. The last issue, which isn't in the packet, it should have been, is the effective date. Right now, the bill it's a non-expedited bill, and it has a transition clause for specific reports, the first reports that are due. But more importantly, it would take effect in 90 days, and
that would be,
I don't think 90 days is enough to hire staff and get everybody up and running, appoint an advisory committee, and get moving. And I think you need to give ourselves more time to get going on this implementation. And I would suggest sometime like July or August of next year. I don't think it can happen a whole lot sooner than that. You're going to need a special or a supplemental appropriation to hire people this year in FY20, and then get them going in FY21. I think that's more realistic.
My only question on that one is, can we hire staff for something that's not in existence at that point? Could we hire staff prior to this going into existence? How does that work?
Well, if there's money in the budget to hire, for positions, yeah, you
So-
could. But I mean, I think you can, but you can't. There just has to be money in the budget. I don't know if there's extra
Right.
positions floating around in the executive branch that they could hire, the professionals they need in the Office of Racial Equity and Social Justice. And OLO is going to need somebody.
Oh, I have no question about that. My only question is which comes first, that chicken or the egg? Can we hire staff if the legislation that's not in existence when we're hiring staff?
is there a way to pass the bill and incorporate language that says,
Go ahead and take care of this.
you can start, something to the effect that, of course, if OLO and the executive are not ramped up in full capacity to produce the impact statements right away, that we would give the requirement of the impact statement, let's say it starts, let's say in August, but that they should begin to build up their capacity and establish, because that's going to take a little while anyway.
Absolutely.
I just don't, a part of me, so I am sensitive to the fact that we need to think about the whole budgetary piece and the budgetary process, but I also don't want to wait until August
Right.
to begin to put into place certain things, because then we're talking really to be kind of fully operational, maybe like in December of
A
2020.
year from now, yeah.
Well,
So I don't know.
here's a suggestion, maybe, I'm just thinking out loud, but we could simply delay the requirement of the impact statements till August 1st.
Until everybody's all set, right?
But the bill
They
will
need to
still take
proceed.
effect in 90 days.
Yeah,
And then we can advertise for people for
Yeah.
the committee
Yeah.
and everything else.
All right.
yeah, and it gives the executive time to see whether they have existing resources that they can deploy. Do we need a special appropriation or not? I mean, but at least things are happening. Councilmember Feetson.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you said that. I was going to say we can, there's different parts of this bill. We could separate
Yeah.
them out to start on some, and I was going to specifically say the impact statement is an obvious one where you can't do those unless you have the staff
Right.
to do them, and we shouldn't set expectations that can't be set up. But, so I think that solves that. I think in terms of the specific date, I'd like to hear specifically from OLO and,
So although CLR said August 1st would be his preferred time to be all ramped up, so I think that if we do change the date for the impact statements to maybe July 31st or something like that, I think that gives, he said that would be the time period that he would need in that respect.
And we're in the next.
and then are there any other,
I'm trying to think of what else is in
are there
here.
any other, that was the one that I thought of. I don't know if there's any other aspects of this that would need to be delayed, but I think that that's the main one, at least the one that I could think of.
Yeah, the executive needs to adopt the regulation, but that doesn't have a time period on it. And each department develop its own racial equity and social justice action plan, also doesn't have a specific time deadline. We've,
I do want to acknowledge that I think around 2:45, we did receive some, I was just texted, some feedback from the African American Health Program. And I think that there are some recommendations regarding the Office of Human Rights to be included in the Equity Advisory Committee. Obviously, because there's going to be a separate equity office, and because the advisory committee leaves the discretion to the executive, we do indicate some of the departments, but it is a discretion. We did kind of leave that open if you would like to include that. We did address the number of members of the advisory committee. I think we did, they don't recommend compensation beyond transportation, parking, and childcare. So I think that we do have that stipend, and that takes care of that. In terms of holding the meetings in the evenings, I think that's something that through regulation, the executive can address. And also they believe that there should be a strategy of commencing with the racial group with the worst longstanding outcomes. I think that our work really has to be all-encompassing. I really feel strongly about that, and I think that we have the capacity to make sure that we are addressing all of the issues, the root causes, et cetera, of those groups that have historically had longstanding, persistent inequities, gaps, and disparities. And so I know that, folks are going to work very diligently to address those issues. But we cannot, that's just my personal opinion as this legislator that has been sitting here for a long time, we don't have the luxury of time to say that we're going to just focus on addressing and eliminating disparities with one group and then take another group, because we have a responsibility for everybody. So we will work diligently to ensure that all of those groups that have been disproportionately affected by gaps, inequities, injustices, et cetera, that that they are addressed appropriately, and that's why having legislation is so important, because it's no longer dependent on the goodwill of decision makers. It's something that now it's going to be mandatory and it's going to be into law. So I just wanted to address that because we'd received this so late that we weren't able to incorporate it into the packet. But really appreciate that that feedback. Okay, sorry, digressed a little bit to acknowledge that.
All right, so what I have is the section on impact statements for legislation would not take effect till August 1st,
August 1st is fine.
and the rest of the bill would take effect
In 90 days,
in 90 days.
yes.
And then the only thing left, I don't have any other issues, is your
A vote?
vote on the bill itself.
Okay,
I
so-
assume you're in favor of it? I don't know. Maybe not.
Without objection, we will adopt the bill as amended.
Want to raise your hand? Should I have a
Shall we
better
raise our
picture?
hands?
Makes for a better picture.
Yes. I know we were wondering about you, Councilor. Yes.
I was leaning back, I didn't realize we were taking pictures.
All right, so we
Congratulations.
will schedule this for next Tuesday, and hopefully we'll be able to take a vote next Tuesday and celebrate Thanksgiving. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your hard work.
Various lanes. Eastbound, Fears Mill Road at University Boulevard, blocking the right lane. On Piney Branch Road, from Carroll Avenue to Flower Avenue, blocking various lanes. Northbound, Georgia Avenue at Connecticut Avenue, blocking the right lane. Northbound, Frederick Road at Spring